if people are free to choose, that's one thing, but children are not free to choose. I think we're going through some. Remember what I was saying. Children are being given antipsychotics in very large numbers in the United States now, with the reason that they have bipolar affective disorder, which is kind of more or less being blended. I think we're living through one of the great abuses of psychiatry in human history. Remember what I've said, because it will come out. It can't be hidden, right? So I'm very against this. You asked about dichotomy, traditional religions. Another example of a traditional religion with a very rapid reproduction, like the Hasidic Jews, is the Amish. The Amish double their population every approximately 12, 15 years. There are huge numbers of Amish. There are more Amish than there are people in Gateshead. In the whole of Gateshead. There are hundreds of thousands of Amish in Pennsylvania. But they and the Hasidic Jews live encapsulated within modern society and are tolerated by modern society because they're quietistic. They don't interfere, they simply allow us to be left alone. And it's very good that they're left alone. If they keep growing at the rate they're going, they will not be left alone. Because there's no way they can be left alone. You know, the rest of the population is reproducing, you know, about 1.5 children, and they are 5, 6, 7 children, you know. So exponential growth on a fantastic degree. But I don't see it.
They bleed away at the edges, so they lose lots of people.
Yes. Yes. But I don't think that they're part of modern society in any more than the Amish are. I think it's actually allowed by modern society rather than being the mainstream. In very briefly. The Russian lady, I assume a Russian lady, just a guess. I agree that I think it's a change. A change in human nature is superficial, but deeply we're the same. Let's think about men and women. They are superficially different, deeply the same. Teenagers and grown-ups are superficially different, but these superficial differences are important. Teenagers are very much more violent than middle-aged and elderly people, and men are more violent than women. And so the superficial differences can be very important, but I agree it is superficial. How widespread? I can't even read my own writing. Oh, how widespread is the desire to alleviate human suffering? I wouldn't say it's universal at all, and you know, traditional religious people would perhaps not be part of it, and much of the world would not be part of it, I agree. So, you know, I think I take your point that we're talking about a small part of the world. Now, you asked me several questions. Why is it incoherent to be a non-religious communitarian? I simply say, where does the communitarian imperative come from? Yes, I know. I'm looking at her. Where does it come from? And I think that these have to have a transcendental origin, the communitarianism. All other arguments go back to the individual, as far as I can work out. It is possible to believe in reducing disability, but be worried about enhancement. Of course, it's possible to do it, but I don't think it's coherent. I think it's that there isn't a division between reducing disability and enhancement. It's a point where people can choose to draw a line, but I don't think there's a firm line there. It's simply a convenient place to do it. And likewise between temporary and permanent. It's very interesting that many of the psychiatric drugs that we think of as having temporary action have a very long action of months. You can take a drug and it can affect you in measurable ways for months, sometimes by changing the genes. So things may not be quite as temporary as we think. As for the elite argument, I agree that it can be spun different ways. It's just that I think in practice, the elite are threatened more by enhancement technologies, whether they realise it or not, than they are likely to be enhanced by them. The new religious movements I regard as being this worldly. I like New Age things, but I think they're part of the hedonistic movement. I think that people do New Age type of things because it makes them feel better and function better here and now, and I don't really regard it as a way, as a third way. I think you have to have a transcendental basis to have something sufficiently different.
I'll be short, I'm fairly hungry. So. example of an informational machine. Unfortunately, one uses the word informational machine in two senses. One is a theoretical sense, which is a method of analysis which accepts the private state, the informational input that changes it, and the output state. And that applies to a whole lot of things. And it's a mathematical construct. But then there is a world of machines for which this type of analysis is suitable. And that is also called an informational machine. And this is why I said, oh yeah, the brain is an informational machine, because it is helped by this kind of analysis. But to give you a real example, it's this: it's a clockwork mouse. You approach a clockwork mouse and you see a little lever on it, and you push the lever and it rushes off. A few days later you want to do the same thing. You approach the clockwork mouse, you push the lever, and it doesn't do anything. Now that's an informational machine, because you can analyze it through an informational model, and the informational modeler would say it's got two internal states. One is wound, one is unwound. And then it would draw a little diagram about how you go from the wound to the unwound to the wound, and you have a complete description of what the machine is doing, even though it's got its internal private state, but in this case it's rather obvious. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing, and you know, clocks and things can sometimes be looked at as informational machine, but it's a bit of a waste of time. So looking at the brain as an informational machine is much more fun. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
The second question, I very much agree with what you were saying, but you, in some sense, you were implying that through designing something which is an informational machine, one makes poorer our understanding of what it is to be human. It's exactly the other way around. One suddenly starts having enormous respect and awe for these sort of things that humans do with their informational structures. An example there is that it's quite easy to design a machine which might have about 80 neurons in it. Very easy, you can put it together in the lab. A machine with 80 neurons in it has more states than the number of molecules in the universe. And it's incredibly complex. And I think that it's getting to grips just with this complexity that one does these informational things. And it certainly doesn't make our outlook on the human poorer. And it's true that if I design a machine, I should have a good control over it, especially if I'm designing a plane that's supposed to fly in the air. I must understand how that works. But let me tell you, and you may never want to step on a plane again, there are some neural networks with private internal states that one just trusts will behave properly in the controls of the engine of a flying airplane. Incredibly complicated. Now, the final point, I'm sort of tempted to become a friend who's called Louis Volpert. He's written a lot of sort of stuff on the sort of anti-democratic nature of science. I mean, what he would say, and I'm not necessarily saying this because I'm not that rude, is, okay, you come to me and you ask me whether that you'd like to know what E. coli does to you. And I tell you, I must go away and do some science on what E. coli does to you. And I do some science. And I come back and I say it's going to kill you. And you would say, that's a terribly anti-democratic thing to do to me. And so the answer to that question is not that science has an anti-democratic control on what we do, but some of the things we discover in science are definitely like that.
Okay, thank you very much.
But would you rather not know?